Hello, this is Music Tech Help Guy, and welcome to this tutorial and review of the Transient Monster plugin from Stillwell Audio. It's a great, cheap plugin for only $49 US, and you can get it in AU, AAX, RTAS, and VST formats, so you should be able to use it on any platform you see fit, including Logic, Pro Tools, and Ableton Live. Transient Monster is essentially a Transient Designer plugin, or sometimes called an enveloper. The plugin basically expands or decreases the intensity of the attack, and also the intensity or the length of the release time of transient material. And you can also increase or decrease the actual length of the first transient of the attack. And so your transient or your attack doesn't sound like it's clipped off too early. So that's kind of nice. Now you can do similar things like this with just compression alone, or using, say, an expander, or even some gates can do some weird things like this. But the Transient Monster, I find it's so easy to use. It's literally just two knobs, a slider, and then a switch, and it's basically four controls to get the job done. So Transient Designer is very, very simple. I find it most useful on drums, especially if you have some drums that were mic'd from a distance and some that were mic'd close up. So if you can, if you put Transient Designer or Transient Monster on the close mics, you can increase the attack and the punch on those drums while still maintaining the natural organic sound of your overheads or your room mics. And so you can blend the two together to get a pretty nice sound. It's also helpful with drums that maybe had insufficient transient material, or maybe had too many mics that were too far away. It didn't pick up enough of the punch from the drum. So let's listen to some multi-track drums here. So these sound pretty good. We have close mics, overhead, some accent mics like on hi-hats and on the ride, some various room mics all blended together. So the cool thing about using Transient Monster is that you can put the plugin on some of the close mic drums, highly process those, and then blend them with the overheads of the room mics to still get a nice natural sound. The thing is, if you were to put the, say, like right in the master bus or the drum bus, you're going to be processing all of the tracks at the same time, and you're going to get a more drastic effect that can sometimes be useful but doesn't blend as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the kick drum. This is just the kick in mic. There's two mics. There's a kick in and a kick out. Here's the kick in by itself. It's got a bit of a click to it. Nothing real crazy, so let me just go ahead and throw the Transient Monster on there. For this, I'm going to pull the attack up, which pulls the intensity of the attack up. So it's a little different than, say, compression, where you pull the attack up and it's pulling the attack time up. This isn't actually time. This is like the intensity of the attack. So punchier is up, and then more flat and less punchy is down. So I'm going to pull this up a bit. I'm going to pull the actual attack time up. You can put it between 30 and 200 milliseconds. I want a lot of the transient to come through because I don't want the kick drum to sound too short or too clipped off. And I'm going to decrease the sustain intensity, which basically shortens the sustain. So instead of getting more of like a woofy or a boomy kick, we're going to get a very short, tight kick. So here's the before. Now I didn't need it quite up all that much. I was just playing around with it just so you can get an idea. You can also oversample the plugin. When I think about oversampling, I think of the process of sampling a signal higher than Nyquist, So when I see an oversample switch in a plugin, I usually think that this means that it's turning off any sort of anti-aliasing filters or anti-aliasing bands that might be limiting any upper level overtones or harmonics from coming through. So I think that's what this does when you turn it on. As a result, it just gets a little bit brighter on some instruments. Some instruments I can't tell at all. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the oversampling on. The other thing I'm going to do, in addition to using Transient Monster, is I'm going to throw an EQ on my kick here and just do a little trickery here on the kick drum. I'm just going to bump up the sub lows here, scoop out some of the mid lows, and then increase the high end just a little bit. So I'm using it in conjunction with an EQ to get a clickier kick sound. Let's see what this sounds like. So yeah, before the plugin's very flat sounding. I throw a Transient Monster and EQ on there. Much more full sounding. One of the unfortunate results of using Transient Monster is it can clip pretty easily because you're increasing the gain on the attack or enhancing the intensity of the attack. So you just have to make sure that you mix at a really low level and work around those transients. So you notice most of my drum channels are pretty low. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take the kick out track as well, which sounds pretty flat itself, and I'm going to duplicate those plugins over onto the kick out track. In Logic 10, you have to hold Option in order to do that. And let's see how these two kicks sound like together. So a nice meaty sounding kick drum there. Let's do the same thing to say the snare drum. We've got a snare bottom and a snare top track as well as a snare side. I'm going to use this to process the snare top and bottom. So I'm going to again throw Transient Monster on there. And for the snare bottom, I'm just going to give it a little bit more attack, a little bit lower sustain, pull the attack time up, and oversample it. Actually, I'm going to pull the sustain time up because I'm getting a little more fizzle out of the snare drum when I pull the sustain up. Actually, I like that. Yeah, with it down, it just sounds too gated. I'm going to go ahead and throw some EQ on this as well. With the snare, I'm going to cut out the lowest lows, beef up the mid lows a bit, and just a little nice little presence boost in here in the high end. I'll go ahead and throw these two plugins on the top snare as well, just like we did the kick drum earlier. Here's the top by itself. I'm actually going to lower the sustain down on the top one to make this one really defined and really tight. And then when you blend the two together, you're sort of getting the tail of the bottom snare and the pop of the top snare. And then with the side snare in there as well. And then everything in there. Now for my hi-hat, the hi-hat's just a bit too short sounding and chucky sounding. I want it to be a little more smooth sounding. So I'm going to do the opposite of what I've been doing with these other drums, and I'm going to put Transient Monster, the attack time lower, and the sustain longer. I'll go ahead and oversample it as well. Increase the attack time. Let's see what the before and after sounds like. Here's the before. Yeah, I just don't want it to sound so ch-ch-ch sounding. I want it to be a little more ch-ch-ch sounding, if you know what I mean. So let's see what all those sound like together. That's not too bad. Another thing you can do, usually what I'll do with the room mics is I'll squash them real hard with some compression, but an alternative to that would be to use Transient Monster to sort of flatten out the transients. So here's just the room mics by themselves. And if I pull the attack time down and the sustain up like I did with the hi-hat earlier, we're getting a lot more reverb tail in there. So let's see what all these sound like together. And just for reference, here's with all of the plugins turned off. And again, with everything back on. Again, it's like it's not, the original's not terrible. It's just when you put just a few simple plugins on, really no compression at all, it just breathes a little bit of life into these drums. Now, one just trick that you can do with Transient Designer, if you're working, say, with like a drum loop, or you just want to process the whole drum bus all at once, if you want that squashed drum sound without using any compression, you can throw Transient Monster on the drum bus, in my case it's just the master output, and increase the sustain time to really bring out the reverb in the room without actually squashing the attack time of your transients with like you would with the compression. Or you could even use that for parallel compression. You could bust this over to an aux track and put the slammed, squashed sound on an aux track and then have your dry signal on another track. So there's all sorts of little things you can do with Transient Monster. I find myself, and I guess this is time for the review now, I find myself using Transient Monster all the time on kick and snare, especially on like real ringy toms as well. Like if you've got a tom that you want to sound a little more defined, a little more short sounding, if you want it to sound a little more tight, you just increase the attack, decrease the sustain. It's really super simple. You don't have to really get into any compression or expansion to make that happen. So I find this really easy to use, even easier to use than, say, Logic's enveloper plugin, which is pretty simple in its own right. As far as my rating, Transient Monster, I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. It's a great plugin. It's very simple. It's very intuitive. It does what it's supposed to do. I wish it didn't clip so easily, but there's really no getting around that. Just like an expander, you increase the gain of a transient, you're gonna clip. You're gonna clip it. You know, once you hit your peak value of basically 0 dBFS. So there's really no getting around that. One thing I'd really like to see in this plugin is something like a soft analog limit, like an analog limiter switch or something, sort of like the Waves API 2500 has in it, where if you turn on the analog mode, the plugin actually won't clip at all because it's sort of emulating some sort of soft limiting function in it, where it doesn't actually light off the clip light. The problem with using Transient Designer plugins like this is you increase the attack and the punch of the drum as much as you want to, but then you have to pull all of your channels down to mix around that transient and then make up for the loudness later on in mastering. So I mean, in some respects, maybe what I'm requesting is just lazy mixing. I don't know, but I would like to see something like that in here, maybe in an updated version. But for the price, you really can't beat it. And Stillwell Audio has a fully functional trial that you can use before you buy it. So I mean, it doesn't really get any better than that. The only other reason why I'm knocking it down to 8 instead of 9 is, like with a lot of the Waves plugins, the Stillwell plugins, I can't increase or decrease the window size in Logic. Offhand, I'm not sure if that's a problem with Pro Tools and other DAWs, but I know at least in Logic 10, I'm not able to increase or decrease the plugin size, which I really hate. I'd like to be able to expand this out so you guys can see it better in the tutorials, and also to save my eyes. Alright, so I hope you enjoyed this video, and thanks again for watching.